Board members, I'd like to call this meeting to order. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jim Hart, and I'm the chair of the Toronto Police Services Board. I'd like to welcome all of you to this hybrid meeting of our board. I'll now read the Indigenous Land Acknowledgement. Although this meeting is taking place virtually, we acknowledge that the land we're on as we hold this meeting is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people. The board also acknowledges that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississauga and Chippewa bands. Members, are there any declarations of interest on the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, I'll move on. Before we begin today's meeting, I would ask that we observe a moment of silence for Police Constable Andrew Hong of Traffic Services, who was tragically killed yesterday. With his death, he's made the ultimate sacrifice to keeping his community safe, and for that we extend our deepest gratitude for his service and for his sacrifice. In the days ahead, as we learn more and plan a fitting tribute to Police Constable Hong, more will be shared with the public. We know that the Toronto Police Service is very much a family in many ways, and the loss of one member has a deep and profound impact on the entire organization. In this time of extraordinary grief and sadness, as we struggle together to deal with this senseless loss of life, we hope that members find solace and support in each other and in various supports and resources available to them through the service. Before I move forward with a moment of silence, I'd like to acknowledge that John Reid, the president of the Toronto Police Association, is here with us, and as well, Matt Moyer, the acting superintendent of Traffic Services, who we express our deepest condolences to you, Matt. Before we do the moment of silence, Mayor, would you like to say a few words?
Well, thank you, Chair, and I just want to echo your words, and I want to begin, of course, by extending on behalf of all the people of the City of Toronto, and I think we all are trying to ensure that the family, the police family, the immediate family of the police officer understand that all of the people of the City of Toronto are grieving today. These people serve all of us, and they keep us safe, and they put themselves in harm's way, and we talk about that often, but then tragically these kinds of things happen to indicate this isn't just talk. And I also want to acknowledge the leadership ranks, and over the last, I had a chance to see last night what was an outstanding honor that was paid to Andrew Hong, Officer Andrew Hong, at the Coroner's Building by his colleagues. And again this morning, to just say that I think the people of this board, the members of this board, but also the people of Toronto would be proud of their police chief, of Superintendent Moyer, and also of the President of the Toronto Police Association in watching and hearing of the support they offer to the immediate family of this police officer and also to the police community. Because I could see myself this morning, and I think anybody who thinks about this that is listening to us this morning or that's here knows that if you lose a member of your own family, it deeply affects you. And I think a lot of people would feel that way the same about their work family. You know, they're people they're with every day, and they work with every day, and they become, you know, friends and become very close. And I also then just want to say something that I said to the officers that I met over the last 12 hours or so, which is to say thank you for the fact that, you know, a lot of them that we met this morning at the traffic services had to get up this morning and come to work. And they were going out to work after we saw them. And they continue to serve us and to protect us. And that is, in the aftermath of a terrible tragedy like this, something that is you know, quite a remarkable part of the job they do for us every day, which is, I think, done extremely well, and we're very lucky. So again, my condolences on behalf of all the people of the City of Toronto to both the family of Officer Hong particularly, but also to the police family. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. Chief, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, thank you, Chair Hart. We've lost an outstanding member of the service, an outstanding individual in Andrew. We give our deepest condolences to his family, and our membership's going to work through it, and we will honor him appropriately in due course. And I really do want to thank the board for their support, and Mayor Tory and yourself for being with the members both last night and again this morning. And it's very, very helpful and much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Now, if you're able, please stand for a moment of silence. Thank you. I'll now turn this meeting over to the Board's Executive Director and Chief of Staff, Ryan Teschner, who will go over the meeting logistics. Mr. Teschner?
Thank you, Chair Hart, and thank you to everyone who's joined us in person, as well as those who have called into this meeting. Please note that this meeting is also being live streamed on the Toronto Police Service YouTube account and will be available there at the conclusion of this meeting. Joining us in person, we have Chair Jim Hart, Mayor John Tory, Vice Chair Francis Nunziata, Member Ainsworth Morgan, Member Ann Morgan, and Councillor Mark Grimes. Member Lisa Kostakis will be joining us shortly. We also have members of our board office staff, Chief Raymer and his command team, members of the service, and of course, members of the public. We have individuals who have registered to make deputations both in person as well as virtually on some of our agenda items. As with our regular meeting process, deputations will be heard prior to the item being discussed and voted on by board members. When it comes time to do a deputation, those who have registered will be called into or brought into the meeting by our colleague Du Buchanan-Gisser. As always, deputants will speak first, followed by an opportunity for board members to ask them questions. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Teschner. Before I go through the agenda, on behalf of the Toronto Police Services Board, I'd like to acknowledge the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II last Thursday at the age of 96. Renowned for her grace, integrity, and dedication, Queen Elizabeth's life was the embodiment of the extraordinary public service that she gave each and every day over an incredible reign spanning 70 years. As a police organization comprised of members dedicated to preserving the greater good, it is an especially poignant time. We know that Queen Elizabeth loved Canada and its people, and she was always supportive of the work of the military, the police, and others in service to their communities. We join the international community in mourning her death, offering our sincere condolences to the royal family, and we pay tribute to her incredible contributions over those many years. Mayor Tory, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Chair. And again, I think the events that we were speaking of earlier on, are just one more thing that destabilize people. It upsets people greatly. And I said on the Queen's passing that, she was a symbol of stability that you could always turn to in any kind of a time, whether it was international or local, because she was always there. And she, you made the point, and I did in my remarks on the day she passed, that, in the royal anthem it says, "Long may she reign over us." And yes, she reigned, but at the same time she served, as you pointed out. And what an extraordinary record of service. In our system, people have various criticisms and commentaries about it, and thank goodness they can. But it works so well. I mean, we have our problems and our challenges, but the system works so well, and I think it's because of that abiding, stable, institution that exists there that is personified by a person. And for the last 70 years, more than my lifetime, more than the lifetime of pretty well any of us here, that has been the person, and an extraordinary record of service, and somebody who did, as you pointed out, have huge affection for not just this country, which she visited, I think, 20 times, but for this city, which she visited, I think, 10 times or some number like that. And I had the good fortune to meet her, and you can't embellish these stories by saying you had some extensive conversation, because in many cases you're not supposed to. But, she was just a person that handled herself at all times with grace and with dignity and with caring. And when you hear of conversations she had with people, they were always conversations that were human and down to earth and caring and compassionate. And so we will miss her, and I hope at the same time that her successor, now King Charles III, will similarly be seen as a source of great stability for us, and something that helps us to continue to build the kind of city and country that we want to live in here. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, I understand you would like to say a few words as well?
Yes, it's an incredible loss for the entire world from my perspective, and it has a huge impact on the people of this province, and in particular people here with this service and what the Queen represents to the organization. So she will be sadly missed.
Thank you. If you're able, I'd like everyone to rise for a moment of silence, please. Thank you. Board members, I'll now go through the agenda for approvals and holds. Item number 1 is the confirmation of the minutes from the meeting held on July 27, 2022. That item is held down for deputations. Item number 2 is a request to extend term of 911 Crisis Call Diversion Pilot Project. We have a written submission from Nicole Corrado. I thank her for that. Board members, anyone wish to hold that item? Motion to approve. Councillor Grimes, could I have a seconder? Ms. Morgan, all in favor? Any opposed? Item number 2 carries. Item number 3 is new board policy, electronic monitoring. We have a deputation on item 3, so that's held down. Item number 4 is records management system, RMS. We have a deputation on item number 4, so item number 4 is held down. Item number 5 is vendor pre-qualification for cybersecurity penetration testing services. Could I have a motion to approve item number 5? Vice Chair Nunziata, seconder, Councillor Grimes, all in favor. Any opposed? Item 5 carries. Item number 6 is contract award to Young Steels Ford Lincoln for Ford Automotive Parts and Supplies. A motion to approve item 6, Councillor Grimes. A seconder, Ms. Morgan, all in favor. Any opposed? Item 6 carries. Item number 7 is addition of Select Highway Traffic Act authorities for Toronto Police Service Court officers. We have a deputation on item 7, so that's held down. Item number 8 is special constable appointments and reappointments September 2022. Could I have a motion to approve item number 8? Vice Chair Nunziata, second by Mayor Tory. All in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Item number 9, budget variance reports. That item is held down for deputation. Item number 10 is request for review of a service complaint investigation, professional standards case number PRS 085616. Motion to approve item 10. Councillor Grimes, a seconder. Mr. Morgan, all in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Item number 11, semi-annual report, Toronto Police Service Board Special Fund, unaudited statement, January to June 2022. We have a deputation on number 11, so that's held down. Item 12 is Chief Administrative Investigation Reports. We have a series of 2 reports, and that's held down for deputation. So board members will go back to the top of the agenda, which is item number 1, and that's the minutes from the last meeting, and I believe we have some deputations, so whenever they're ready, please put the deputants on. I believe the first deputant is in person. Mr. Venzel, is he here? Yep. Mr. Venzel, just for your information and other deputants' information, you'll see we have the clock working at this meeting, so you'll see it in front of you there, so I won't need to remind you of your time. It's behind you as well. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Good morning. I held down the minutes because it is not important to the priority. Completely correct future-seeing predictions of the next terrorist event and free energy from a UAP abduction. Looking for a practical solution that works. It is in everyone's best interest to find a constructive resolution. I believe that I have found it. IPC has ruled in my favor and given a fragment of full disclosure from 51 Division. Let me show you what they sent me. Redacted page, blank page, blank page, and it goes on with more blank pages. Now, poor 51 Division could not understand they are dealing with a UAP abduction and future seeing predictions, so they dismissed it as improbable. It is over their head. Good thing the board is here to give it sober second thought and put the right decision on it. Witness number 1 is the abductee. This contradicts what Office of the Chief claims, that they cannot bring her in for questioning. 51 Division had her and did an inadequate interrogation. We can reopen their investigation and record the abductee about zero-point energy and flying cars. One problem solved. Whatever problems Office of the Chief has, I can solve in a few minutes very easily. Witnesses number 1 to 200 are Ryerson and reporters. They can reopen the faulty 51 investigation and recross all of them. The blank pages are the France forewarnings and the coronavirus forewarnings. Ryerson and reporters are witness to this and had the forewarnings. It is reasonable for new future seeing predictions to be taken seriously and acted upon. The past predictions are proof that remote viewing works. These events can be predicted and prevented. Office of the Chief has made no effort to take or act on new predictions. Within the next few minutes, we can send out the radio car and get a confession on the UAP abduction and the predictions by crossing Ryerson and reporters again. Here's the thing. If TPS does not do it, someone else will. The predictions went out all over the world. The review has a copy of the France email, and the virus predictions were made in their office, of which there is an audio recording. For their own reasons, they have censored it from the final report. The IPC is very well aware of the correct predictions and has some power over the police to release this information to the public, the world at large. What are the next steps in this process? Who will take and act on new predictions and place zero-point energy into the public domain? I urge the board to reopen 51 Division investigation into Ryerson and reporters and do the right thing. Another good reason to keep going with this is that new predictions can save innocent lives. Are we to turn our back on future victims by pretending this is a little unorthodox so no one will act on good information? The military-grade viewers advise practitioners to go operational on their own. If we did a preemptive strike on Incel, we would have had to wrestle Alex Manassin, the desk sergeant, the super, and then the Crown prosecutor. All of them would be patting themselves on the back that it is assault on Manassin and that he has the full right to rent a van and use it how he wants. A flying squad that is judge, jury, and executioner can bypass this bureaucratic nightmare. It is a matter of the board finding the right people who know what to do with this kind of information. Reopen this as a UAP investigation. Transparent and accountable on my side. The cover-up is all on your side.
Thank you. Board members, any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, thanks for coming in today. Appreciate it. Next deputant, I believe, is Miguel.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My condolences on the loss of one of your members yesterday. I submitted my deputation, but it's not part of the record, unfortunately, this morning. Apologies for that. My name is Miguel, and I'm running for Ward 13, Toronto Centre. I have come to this board since 2010, speaking truth to power, steady. In my recollection, so far is that people has always been allowed to speak freely without fear. Board members, the people should be allowed to express their feelings, especially when they're mourning a son or daughter. Under the procedure by law, a deputy may not disobey a decision of the chair and must immediately withdraw where the chair has ruled a deputation is concluded. I am really worried if you will kick out moms and dads, especially when they lost a member of our community, grieving parents, those whose sons and daughters were taken away by a bullet from the Toronto police. You cannot put a lid on our feelings, John Tory. It helps us to shape these police services better and to hold this service and board accountable and transparent to Toronto taxpayers. And my job as an Indigenous activist has always been to keep your elected officials to the feet to the fire, to keep your promises made in the past. As an activist speaking today, I am prepared to object to having my freedom of expression violated by this board and maybe remove it from today's meeting. I'm asking the board to remove the changes I have and have consultations and allow the people to have a chance to speak on the changes made by office of Mr. Ryan Treshner, the overview of rules for deputations. These bylaws somehow were appear on the website, and thank you, Derek Moran, for alerting the community about those new changes to happen. It contained multiple rights violations which render many of those rules void. We feel this is retaliation because of regular voices that speak what needs to be said. Jared last week spoke to this board, and you, Mr. Hart, cut him off because he was exercising his rights and freedoms. Chris has also been cut off. And needs to say what happened to Dion Rene was really shameful. And the removal of Desmond Cole from this board meeting. You are setting rules that prevent us from telling you the facts, as raw as it sounds, but those are the facts. So, and I'm here to speak on the confirmation of the minutes, but to make a point. Chief's monthly verbal update. The question I have been asked, why the chief monthly update at the board isn't an item on the TPS agenda so the public can speak, or at least since have it published online. With regards to this, I think I am aware that the Police Service Act says you can set up your own rules. We don't have no problem with that, but I want to remind you that freedom of expression is the most valuable tool that we have. Please do not curtail our freedoms. Do not say what cannot we said and what can we said. So that's all I want to ask you today is that you remove all the new changes made by Mr. Treshner, allow the public to participate. And if they agree with you, Mr. Treshner, kudos to you, all the power to you. But in my view, as an activist since 2010, it really sucks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miguel. Any questions of Miguel? Seeing none, thank you for speaking with us. Appreciate it.
Welcome.
Doobie, can you put on the next deputy? I believe it's virtual, Mr. Langenfeld.
Chris?
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Yes, like others, I'm following up on last month's situation with Mayor Tory's objection and point of order regarding Derek Moran having raised the issue regarding Toronto's Chief Public Officer of Health, Dr. Eileen Davila, and Mr. Tory having raised a point of order saying that it's a point of order that this deputy should make this kind of accusation, which is, first of all, completely unfounded and ridiculous. And in fact, I filed a complaint when I first read about this information reported in the media. We've seen that the media and not mainstream media, but these are alternative media who are reporting, citing websites and publications from different medical conferences where Dr. Davila's husband is reported as having received payments from Pfizer and from AstraZeneca and having received financial backing. I filed an allegation of a conflict of interest with the Toronto Board of Health, with the Integrity Commissioner, with a number of other city departments. And after getting a whole lot of runaround, it eventually came back to, well, we're going to look into this after COVID is over. And Mr. Tory, you were CC'd on a number of those emails going back, in fact, to 2021, March 9th, 2021. You were CC'd on that issue. I assumed that it wasn't going to be a major issue. I assumed that it was going to be something that there would be a quick response and it would be put to bed. And in fact, that the media reports probably weren't accurate. However, instead, what we've gotten is a lack of follow-up from the city. And as Derek mentioned, I then eventually went to an actual Toronto Public Board of Health meeting and sat there in front of Dr. Davila and raised this point, questioning whether or not, in fact, she had or her family had been receiving payments from the pharmaceutical companies in order to promote apparently COVID vaccination. And there was no response. So much like you, Mr. Tory, when we raised the issue of you having private meetings with Axon Corporation before this board approved multi-million-dollar annual contracts with Axon, and you obviously had the opportunity to deny it and simply say that that was a mistake and to correct the record. The same is true for Dr. Davila. However, she doesn't correct the record. So the only reasonable assumption is that, in fact, her family is receiving payments from the company that's profiting off these rather draconian measures that the city has taken, firing staff and laying them off if they refuse to accept what one would assume as reasonable medical justification. However, we have to question that when, in fact, the people that are making these not only recommendations, but compelling people to get vaccinated are apparently receiving payments for that and haven't disclosed it. We don't know how much those payments are. Is it hundreds of thousands, millions? We don't know. And who else is getting any portion of that money? What we do know is that the minute somebody raises it, we have Mr. Tory jumping up and trying to curtail their free speech, and Mr. Hart and Mr. Grimes jumping right in there. Of course, we know that there are a number of conflict of interest allegations being leveled on those folks as well. And here we are where I guess like protects like, and the fact that one group is being accused of a conflict of interest, others that are accused of similar actions jump to their defense and violate people's right to raise these issues with government, which is the whole point of freedom of expression. But of course, that isn't something that this board follows. Thank you. That concludes my submission.
Any questions of the deputant, board members? Seeing none, thank you. Next deputant, Derek.
I just want to point out that apparently the Ottawa Police Services Board, at the very beginning of their meetings, before all the people who signed up to speak on items for presentations, they deal with people that just want to sign up and speak with one general item that's not on the agenda, and that just gets dealt with. Just something to think about right off the bat. And I just want to point out that if every Toronto police officer was like Officers Jay Gallo and C. Hawley there, who are like as impartial with me back in March when they were called on me, then nobody would really have a problem with the Toronto Police. So Interim Chief Raymer deserves to give them a raise, or promotion too. So I just want to say about me speaking at this meeting, this shall not be deemed to be in any way my consent expressed or implied, in doing so as fraud. God bless His Majesty the King, and long live His Majesty the King. If I have ever led this board to believe that I am a person as mentioned in the definition for deputation in this board's bylaw definition section, then that would be a mistake, and that I ask this board to please forgive me. I also want to note that while she was alive, I got to execute the trust with Queen Elizabeth II, as alluded to in sections 32 and 59 of the Ontario and Federal Financial Administration Acts, respectively. Also want to point out you got a nice big shiny clock here this month. So in these minutes, it says, Mayor Tory raised a point of order concerning Mr. Moran's deputation and suggested the deputant made inappropriate comments in the form of an accusation concerning Dr. Eileen Davila and her husband. First of all, what I understand about points of order is that, like, from reading it, to me, it was an improper point of order on Mayor Tory's part. And I just want to point out that the month before, he did make a proper point of order when he pointed out Chris Langenfeld, and thanks for Chris's support, when Chris Langenfeld had said something to the effect of billions of dollars being spent on body-worn cameras instead of millions. And so Mayor Tory made a proper point of order pointing out that mistake. Second, what I understand about point of orders, once they're made, the chair has to make a ruling on them. And I don't believe you actually, to be fair, that you made a proper ruling on it. Because, I mean, if you had just said continue on with whatever you're saying for the rest of the 5 minutes, like, it wouldn't have turned into a gong show. But, like, you know how, I spoke about this with you in your board, in your office 3 years ago, about how badly Andy Pringle used to try and stifle people from freedom of expression by saying stick to the topic. And I was shocked when you did that with me. That's the first time you ever did that. So, putting aside Diana referring to me as Mr. Moran and deputant, which I do not consent to, the part she left out, which was in these minutes, was exactly what was the accusation concerning Dr. Eileen Davila and her husband that I made. So I don't know if you heard, but I wrote an email to Dr. Davila to clarify and clear up what I had said. So what part of what I had said to her was, in regards to an accusation Mayor Tory refers to, I just wanted to let you know that if I have ever led during my deputation to believe in any way that I was accusing you of being on the take from COVID vaccine makers and that your husband indirectly was being used to receive payment in the form of showing up to speaking engagements and being paid honorary speaking fees in return for giving a speech, then that would be a mistake, and that I ask you to please forgive me. Just as Toronto candidate for mayor Chris Langenfeld spoke about with his 5 minutes at the Board of Health 2 months ago, and I spoke about at the Board of Health a month later, I simply want interim chief Raymer to ask you himself that based on Diverge Media's reporting, if it is true that your husband has received money from COVID vaccine makers. I think that's a fair question. I'm not accusing anyone. I know, my father told me at a very young age, you can't jump to conclusions, you got to get your facts straight. So I know I can't go around telling anyone that they're on the take or accepting bribes, but I think it's a very fair question that, like Chris has said, he's got the runaround, Tanya Dalbianco, at the complaints officer at the Board of Health, did not take his complaint and said, oh, like over a year ago, there's going to be a review. Well, Chris did not email her to ask, is there going to be a review about what you guys did with COVID? So he's got the runaround. It's a very fair question. Nobody in the mainstream media has asked that. And I just want to point out what Premier Ford said here during the council cut crisis, that you all share the same boss, you all work for the people, and I just happen to be one of the people.
Thank you, Derek. Any questions? Seeing none. Thanks, Derek. Board members, motion to approve the minutes of July the 27th, 2022. Councillor Grimes, seconder. Vice Chair Nunziata, all in favor. Any opposed? That's carried. Chief, I'm going to go over to you now for your update. I believe you have one for us.
Thank you, Chair Hart. There's two items I'm going to speak to this month, and it's, first of all, I'll start with Rolling Loud, and then I'm going to speak to the Missing and Missed implementation team. This weekend saw over 80 events occur in our city, most notably were the Toronto International Film Festival, the Eagles Concert, and the Rolling Loud Music Festival. An extensive amount of planning was undertaken by the service in advance of this weekend. Live Nation, which hosted the Rolling Loud, also invested significantly in the planning and security for the event. For months, the service and Live Nation communicated and collaborated to ensure the plans put in place had the right resources deployed where they would be most effective. Throughout the festival, the service had liaisons that were embedded with the organizers to ensure there was constant communication and the ability to pivot as the event unfolded. Through our intelligence, it was determined that certain artists required close coordination of scheduling in order to avoid potential gang conflicts. As a partner in public safety, Live Nation demonstrated a willingness to pivot and adjust their operations based on our concerns. This was demonstrated at the early stages of the concert when it was discovered that security checks of patrons attending were not being conducted effectively. Once identified, event security was augmented with additional security supervisors and training. The service ensured that officers assigned to the entrances were briefed and fully engaged in oversight of those entering the venue, paying particular attention to the areas where the security checks were occurring. This additional engagement resulted in a male patron observed to be discarding an item in the trash right before entering the venue. No doubt, having seen the effectiveness of the searches being conducted by security staff with the support of our Toronto police officers, this individual felt that they would not be able to enter the venue with the item they were carrying. Officers observed the male and retrieved the discarded item, which was in fact a conversion kit that would allow a semi-automatic pistol to fire in automatic mode. We have seen before, particularly at the Las Vegas mass shooting at the Harvest Music Festival in 2017, just how deadly these conversion kits can be. The male was quickly arrested along with a female companion. We allege that the woman was identified as being involved in a robbery in August where a victim was shot by an unknown male party after being set up by her. This investigation is ongoing. On Saturday at approximately 10 p.m., there was a report of gunfire in the VIP area at the concert. Officers attended the area immediately and secured the scene. Their quick and immediate response brought a swift end to the incident, preventing any further gunfire. Once the VIP area was cleared of patrons, a search resulted in locating a .380 Ruger semi-automatic pistol. The pistol was loaded, but it jammed, indicating that it had been fired, but thankfully was stopped by the malfunction and could not fire any further rounds in that crowded area. Our investigation into that incident continues. The last incident I will discuss is nothing short of heroic on the part of our officer, Constable Igor Drazko, one of the newest members to join our service. The officer had finished working at the Rolling Loud concert and was off duty. Having changed, the officer was headed home when he decided to get something to eat. While at the plaza located at Morningside Road and Staines Road in Scarborough, he observed two individuals lurking in the area. Shortly afterwards, it is alleged that these two individuals attempted a carjacking at the gas station, but were unsuccessful. During the incident, they pointed a firearm at the victims. The officer observed the commotion and saw the two suspects flee the area. He gave chase into a nearby field where the two suspects split up. PC Drasko identified himself as a police officer and continued his pursuit, at which point the suspect yelled at the officer that he was going to shoot him. The officer then heard a loud bang he believed to be a gunshot and smelled gunpowder in the air. Undeterred, the officer caught up to the suspect and attempted to arrest him. The suspect continued to struggle, bit the officer, and threatened to shoot him again. The officer was able to disarm the suspect, get control of him, and call 911, resulting in additional officers arriving and controlling the male. The firearm was loaded with 6 rounds of ammunition. Miraculously, the only physical injuries suffered by the officer were scratches to his face, arms, and hands. I stress physical injuries here because no doubt this incident may have a profound impact in other ways on him. We will support him in every way possible. I am certain there are more, but these are just a few of the incidents to highlight the extraordinary work done by Toronto police officers over the course of this past weekend to keep the public safe and to prevent further injury. I now want to turn our attention to the Missing and Missed implementation team, and I'd like to provide an update. As noted in our last formal report to the board, the work on the recommendations of Justice Epstein are progressing, and I am quite happy with the pace, progress, and output. Every 2 weeks, I devote a command meeting to updates on issues of great importance to the service. MMIT is one of the standing items on the agenda for these meetings. The work on these recommendations is being conducted with a clear focus on consultation and partnership with the community. This approach was a key part of Justice Epstein's recommendations, and we are honoring that sentiment. None of the work on any of the recommendations is considered complete until the team has decided it is complete, and that team includes a number of members of the community. The work continues, and there's been no loss of focus or resolve on the part of anyone engaged. We engaged our communities from the outset and have co-produced everything from the recruitment and selection of the MMIT community representatives right to the development of the goal and deliverables for every one of the 151 recommendations. The MMIT has collaboratively analyzed the 151 recommendations and agreed that there are 395 deliverables, milestones, and the same number of deliverables. Also thus far, the MMIT have formally agreed that 12 of the recommendations have been implemented. The implementation of these recommendations required not only the work involved in completing the recommendations, but also the completion of a completely new business process that was created collaboratively and in accordance with Justice Epstein's guidance. This process requires the completion of a newly instituted form, which together with all supporting documentation is shared with all MMIT members and the public. There is an established approval process that is followed on all the work of the team. The team also created a public-facing dashboard, which includes key information including the signed reports, a list of deliverables, the date of completion of all deliverables, the approval signatures, and all supporting documentation. Furthermore, I can advise that 12 service members are assigned exclusively to the MMIT. There are also 2 OPP members, 14 community representatives, 4 working group leads, and 30 recommendation leads from across the service. Great work is underway on many recommendations that have not yet been marked as implemented. For example, pursuant to Recommendation 40, we have doubled the staffing of the Missing Persons Unit. This has enabled us to make operational changes on how the MPU supports frontline officers dealing with these cases. Again, these changes were made in close cooperation and consultation with our community representatives. Other similar types of work are being done on recommendations 33 and 84. Although these are early days, we are already seeing improved outcomes for the people of Toronto. Remember, none of recommendations 33, 40, or 84 are yet considered implemented. Nonetheless, the public is already benefiting from the work the MIT is doing as a result of these recommendations. We believe that many more recommendations will be implemented between now and the new year. It would be contrary to the commitment we have made to deepen meaningful collaboration for us to say just how many will be implemented. We continue to work on the recommendations in the manner recommended by Justice Epstein, a process that incorporates the thoughtful feedback of our community representatives. The focus is ensuring that we get to the right place in the right way, thereby creating, and this is the key, enduring change that meets the community expectations and thereby enhances public safety. I am, and we are all, grateful to the members of the communities who have stepped forward to help and to take on this important and challenging work. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions of the Chief? Seeing none. Motion to receive the Chief's update. Vice Chair Nunziata, second by Mayor Tory. All in favor? Any opposed? That carries. We'll now move forward to item number 3, which is a new board policy, electronic monitoring. And we have one deputant. Derek, when you're ready.
Board policy, electronic monitoring of employees, which is good because in the future, if a Toronto Police Service member ever wanted to look back because they were wondering, hey, at what meeting exactly did the board pass this policy, now they will know, unlike, the imaginary mandatory vaccination policy that never actually was passed and approved at this board. In case a member of the Toronto Police Service was wondering, though, this is from Homex Realty versus Wyoming, 1980, where the Supreme Court of Canada said, it is trite law that a municipality may act only by bylaw, and in any case, only within its statutory jurisdiction. So you guys are making policies here, and the court seems to be saying that these should all be done by strictly bylaws. So this is from Greater Vancouver Transportation Authority versus Canadian Federation of Students, British Columbia component, 2009. Supreme Court of Canada said, no matter how broadly the word law is defined for the purposes of Section 1, a policy that is administrative in nature does not fall within the definition because it is not intended to be a legal basis for government action. So in this report it says, in particular, staff considered the unique rights, responsibilities, and obligations of police officers employed by the board as recognized by the Police Services Act and reflected through the general non-application of the ESA. One unique right TPS members may not be aware of. How ironic is this again? I was trying to tell Officers Jay Gallo and C. Hawley when they were hanging out with me in front of City Hall, trying to determine whether or not I was actually trespassed. I was trying to tell them about this particular case law, but I didn't have it off my head, and they are here now to hear it firsthand. How wonderful is that? Metropolitan Toronto Municipality Police Services Board versus Metropolitan Toronto Police Association, 1993, the Ontario Court of Appeal said, the interesting contradiction is that the association insists on the letter of the law being followed when that is in its interest. The officers are within their legal rights in insisting on the letter of the law. So, these officers, those officers, the officers watching in their offices throughout all the divisions, remember, you have the right to insist on the letter of the law. This is Barrick Gold Corporation versus Ontario on 2000 Ontario Court of Appeal. Municipalities must do more than conform with the strict letter of the law to remain within the boundaries of their lawmaking powers. Municipalities must, however, do more than conform with the strict letter of the law in order to remain within the boundaries of their lawmaking powers. And you know how much I love my maxims of law. Every jurisdiction has its boundaries. In this report, it also says, application. This policy applies to civilian members of the Toronto Police Service and to Toronto Police Services Board staff. For greater clarity, this policy applies solely to all employees of the Toronto Police Services Board as defined by the Ontario Employment Standards Act 2000. If this sounds familiar, that's because in Patak versus Sabat 2004, Ontario Superior Court said, bylaws are regulations, ordinances, rules, or laws adopted by a corporation for its government. The function of a bylaw is to prescribe the rights and duties of the members with reference to the internal government of the corporation, the management of its affairs, and the rights and duties existing between the members inter se. And the Black's Law definition for inter se is between or among themselves of a right or duty owed between the parties rather than to others. And I just wanted to point out that one great thing that Mark Saunders did as Chief of Police was put in one of the agenda items a while back was pointing out the applicability. The provisions of this bylaw shall apply to all members and employees of the service and the board. So in the future, I don't work for free. If you guys want me to comply with your corporate bylaws, I'll tender you an offer and we can negotiate on the rate of payment. And I'll expect to be paid in Bitcoin, by the way.
Thank you, Derek. Any questions of Derek? Seeing none. Board members, the new board policy, electronic monitoring. Any questions on the report? Seeing none, would anyone like to move adoption of the report? Ms. Morgan, seconder. Councillor Grimes, all in favor? Any opposed? That carries. We now move forward to item number 4, which is Record Management System, RMS. And I believe we have a deputant here, Mr. Schwartz. Welcome.
Thank you.
Start whenever you're ready.
All right, great, thank you. Mayor Tory, Chairman Hart, members of the board. My name is Adam Schwartz. I'm Executive Vice President of Verstrom.
Yeah, I think you're, push the microphone button there. No button?
Is it not?
Are
Are you not able to hear me?
Okay, we've got it.
There we go.
Okay.
So, as I was saying, Mayor Tory, Chairman Hart, members of the board. My name is Adam Schwartz. I am Executive Vice President of Verstrom Public Safety. With me today, I have Kimberly Vachon, who has been your account manager for Versturm for the last more than a decade, as we are the current provider of your records management system. Before I begin, though, I think it's incredibly important that we, Chief Raymer and the entire Toronto Police Service, our deepest condolences for the tragic loss of Constable Hong. It's actually it's something that my family has dealt with personally, and I have just the deepest sympathies for everyone at the police service. So, while I do thank you for allowing me to be here, I have to say it's with no pleasure. We are a proud partner of the Toronto Police Service, and we are very proud of our partnership, and up until this point, our collaboration with the Toronto Police Service. And we just went through a process that did not sit right with us. And we have raised concerns. And even how those concerns have been addressed just compounded the distress we felt over this process. Thus, we filed this deputation. And I want to say that it was not without consideration. It was not something we wanted to do. But we did feel that the records management system, RFPQ, was a flawed and failed process, and we needed to bring this to your attention. Given the failings of this RFPQ, we've submitted this deputation that we hope you have read. As if you have not, I respectfully encourage that I encourage you to take this off the agenda today. As a matter of point, this is not our first deputation. This is actually our second deputation in this process. The first was unilaterally converted to a pre-award bid dispute, not something we requested. It was done by the Toronto Police Service Purchasing Group without our request or approval, and so therefore we did submit an additional deputation, which is what we're here to discuss today. So, as we look at this, I think that it's to say that this RFPQ was a surprise would be such an understatement. For the last more than a decade, we have provided records management services to the Toronto Police Service and have not a single formal written communication of dissatisfaction have we received. And suddenly we find out about this RFPQ 2 weeks prior to the release of the document, and we accept and respect the right of the Toronto Police Service to explore their options and look at what the market has to offer. That's not the issue. We just ask for a fair, open, and competitive process, one that this flawed RFPQ is not. So I very much thank you for your time. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions, board members? I just have one before I ask staff a question. You mentioned a flawed process a few times in your deputation, but you didn't give any examples. Can you just drill down on what that is? I know you provide written material, but I'd like you to give us some examples of what you're talking about in terms of being flawed.
Absolutely. Kim, do you want to? We have quite a list, and we'd be happy to just keep it to the high level and allow you to read the deputation unless you want us to go deeper into it.
Thank you. There were a number of concerns that we identified with the RFPQ, which we articulated, and I will keep them high level. The first one was an incomplete list of requirements based on our understanding of how TPS uses a records management system. We felt and identified that there were not as many mandatory requirements as we would see in a records management system for a police service. We also identified prescriptive requirements that were very specific, which led us to believe that perhaps there was already a vendor in mind. We also identified that there were missing requirements that a police records management system would need, requirements that are in place today at the Toronto Police Service that we know are crucial, such as, for example, an interface to the MTO, which is the Ministry of Transportation of Ontario for collision reports, or the submission of death-related reports to the Office of the Chief Coroner for Ontario. These are crucial interfaces that we know TPS requires to operate, and they were not part of the requirements. We also identified unclear requirements that were very difficult for us to respond to, and when we asked for clarity, for clarification during the question and answer period of the RFPQ, we did not receive adequate answers. In fact, a lot of our examples or questions were not even addressed. We found that part very concerning and unfair. Those were some examples that we were able to provide.
I might add, let me add real quick that we were down selected past the initial documentation component of the RFPQ, and it was in the demonstration period where there were 12 items that we were said not to have passed. Several of these items are items that we currently have in production that are being used at Toronto Police Service. There were other items that are items that you literally can't demonstrate due to, say, describing a certain type of code or interface that you could demonstrate perhaps an outcome of, but you couldn't actually show that component working. So we referenced the fact that it's currently working in our system at Toronto Police Service. So there are many components to this. One of the issues you asked about, what are we concerned with the process? There was no consideration of cost in the RFPQ. As we look at a competitive procurement environment, it's what drives greatest value for money. When you eliminate and create a sole source procurement guised in a competitive procurement, you are doing it is not exactly in the best interest of the taxpayer, obviously, because you have lost your advantage of being able to negotiate between multiple vendors. So happy to answer additional questions, trying not to keep this too long.
Okay. Thank you. Board members, any further questions? Mayor Tory?
Well, I'd just like to ask, just on that last point, because I read your written submission, and you would agree with me, I'm sure, though, that if it's decided, and I realize this is a point of contention in the letter as well, if it's decided, though, that you don't meet, or somebody doesn't meet the qualifications or the criteria that any purchaser is looking for, that I don't think it's fair to say that it's a sole source in terms of it being some conscious decision that was taken only to go to one person, but rather they're only ending up negotiating with the one person who somebody judged was able to deliver the product they're looking for. And so it isn't as if the board or the service just said, we're only going to go to one person and ask about this. They had a wide open process, which a number of people responded to. Then it was down to 2, and then it got down to 1 because of a judgment made, which I realize you disagree with, that your company couldn't deliver what the people involved were looking for. And so I just don't think it's fair in that sense to say there was some deliberate decision to go to sole source. I think you'd agree you don't just leave people in for the sake of having a competing bidder if they're bidding with a product that the customer doesn't think is the right one, whether that judgment is fair or not. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think what you're saying is actually, it's a great point. And to that point, it's the difference of having what Kim described as prescriptive or a particular language that is specific to a certain vendor, which is what your RFPQ had. It had very specific definitions that came from another vendor. That's why I refer to it as the sole source procurement, shrouded in the idea of being a public competitive procurement. So I think you can understand. I
do, and I guess when these things come up through Mr. Chair, I would just say that ends up in a way being an accusation, I guess if you want to call it that, or an allegation of somebody, misconducting themselves by putting language in that kind of would exclude you and a whole bunch of other people in direct purchase to somebody else. And, there's a lot of that gets said in this business of the public domain, and it's our responsibility to, try to make sure that doesn't happen. And most of the time, I would think the officials, whether it's of the police service or the government, would have no intention ever of doing that. But that was my second and final question, which was that you said in here that you didn't think when these allegations were brought to the attention of the police service that you received a fair, I can't remember the words, but a fair and objective re-examination of what went on here. What would have constituted, just so that I can understand what would have constituted, because it looks to me like there were things done, by the police service to re-examine, the questions that you asked about, and there was a fairness opinion and so forth and so on. What would have constituted a fair and objective examination of this in your view?
A typical document of this sort would have thousands of requirements with a very specific mandatory component. That mandatory component, as Kim said, would either err on the side of the thousands or it may be three, because you're trying to actually justify who is a viable proponent of the solution, right? That's one of the issues that we've seen here, is that this was it was 49 all mandatory components that were very specific, again, as I've said, to, it was not a traditional document. It was not a traditional RFPQ. We have great experience with these. Additionally, to not include any cost component. In 2009, it was the budget was somewhere in excess of $20 million. Now, I don't believe the thought is that you're going to spend $20 million on this procurement. Maybe it'd be half of that, but maybe it'd be $20 million. I think it's unclear because you haven't gone through a process that actually looks at what different vendors would provide for what value for money. So there's a number of areas that the document is flawed in. Again, I am not suggesting that you should not examine the market, investigate what's out there, and go through a fully vetted process where it is an actual open, competitive, and fair bid. I think that will result in a good decision. I think that results in a fair decision. We are absolutely willing to compete. We're very confident in what we provide, and if it doesn't match up, that number one rule of customer success is have customers that you can be successful with. We felt we were being successful with the Toronto Police Service, but if the Toronto Police Service has felt differently, that's okay. It hadn't been communicated to us. But if we go through this process, we are happy to compete openly. But to have a limited document like this, that's what the request today was, to take it off the agenda and do a deeper evaluation for this board to just make sure that you are comfortable with this process and that you have done all the things that you feel you need to do to ensure a fair process. And in the end, we support you. But we would like to see this process begin again as an open and fair process, what we consider a robust, fair process.
Thank you. Any further questions, board members? I just have one before we go to staff. You mentioned 49 mandatory requirements and that being too many. Can you give me a sense of what a reasonable number would be, in your opinion? If 49 is too many, what isn't too many?
It's a great question as well. And you'll see sort of two extremes. And in an actual, some of these documents, like I said, will have thousands of requirements, and it's a scored objective of, do you have some of that? Do you have, what is it? Is it yes, no, maybe, and here's the description? And then you'll have 3, 4 mandatory requirements that it's a pass-fail. Without that pass-fail, you're out. So it's just a very non-traditional approach to have 50 mandatory requirements with no scoring component where it's a rated scale. I actually, in my entire career of doing this, have not seen a document like this before. Doesn't mean it's that because of my experience doesn't say that it's wrong. It's as we've dug into the document and looked at what this process has led to, and Well, I've explained it.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, thank you very much. We'll now go to questions of staff and service members. Thank you. Board members, questions? You can take your seats over there. Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you. Board members, questions? Mayor Tory.
I'll just start off, Chair.
Vice Chair Nunziata.
I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Let's just deal with the two that were the principal points of discussion with our deputants today and the people who were involved in this bid, and maybe ask the staff if they could address the first one that we were discussing, which was the I'll call it the extraordinary nature, as the deputant suggested, of this version with the score sheet and the requirements and so forth. I mean, perhaps it's just by way of a response to that series of questions raised by them.
Sir, Colin Stairs, Chief Information Officer. Are we getting audio? Check, sound check. Colin Stairs, Chief Information Officer. Let me just start by saying that as the leader for information technology, information management in the service, it's my job to form the asks to the market as to what the service needs in order to move us forward. And that process starts with understanding what the benefits the service and the public need from this technology and the modernization and transformation that it enables. That process has been ongoing for 2.5 years, the entire time I've been here. It took the form of what I call the benefits framework, which I presented here to the board to identify and collate all of the needs that the service has in order to transform into the service that we need to be. That modernization was ambitious and requires a significant amount of transformation in both the way we do business and the way we relate to the public. That benefits framework then brought forward from it a strategy, and out of that were 6 interlocking and self-reinforcing programs that included a series of modernization. Again, that was made public to the board. And the procurement that we have in front of us is rooted in the benefits framework and the strategies. All of those have been made publicly available through the board. So in addressing the specific points around this deputation, there was a pre-award dispute. It was evaluated and was found to be without merit. We engaged a fairness commissioner to review the procurement, and they found it to be fair. The City of Toronto Legal Department were consulted throughout the process, including the deputation today and the points that were raised. Once this process concludes, once this matter is decided by the board today, there will be a debrief. We have been in a blackout period, and we have not been able to debrief the vendors until that blackout period ends and the decision is made on the RFPQ. At that point, Versaterm will have the opportunity to take further measures to dispute the decision in the RFPQ. Most critically, this is not an award of a contract. This is a RFPQ, so it's a request for proposal qualification. This simply determines who is qualified to move on to a further stage. There is no commitment to purchase. Absolutely none. With respect to value for money, this RFPQ was the first stage of an RFP which would have followed had there been multiple vendors. And so the multiple questions, the 2,000 scored criteria, et cetera, would have been something which would have been undertaken had we had multiple vendors. As it was, we also had provision for a single vendor making it through the RFPQ process. And in that case, we'll be looking at a business case where we will evaluate value for money, and we'll come back to the board at a later date to evaluate whether we're moving forward with that. I'd also remind the board that there is absolutely no value in purchasing a solution which is not fit for purpose. So with respect to the competitiveness of the process, As I mentioned, TPS telegraphed all of its intent, its needs, et cetera, to the entire market and to the public through this board and my presentation to this board. This was the first and qualifying hurdle in a longer process, and mandatory requirements were meant to exclude any vendors which would not be able to support the strategy. The procurement was not challenged in any way by any of the proponents until after the recommendation for award was made public. So I feel confident that this is a fair, honest expression of the needs of the service to support our modernization, and I ask that the board approve the RFPQ.
Can I just have a couple more, just two areas, but just on this first one, before we move on to the objectivity or lack thereof of the review process that was requested by Versaterm. They suggested in their deputation today and in their written documents that there were actually words, I'm paraphrasing, but words that were in our request that directly were taken from, you know, sort of the product description or whatever of the other competitor, and I thought that was a serious allegation because it implies that, you know, the thing was tailored to make sure only one person could win. Could you just respond to that? Because that's a very specific suggestion, I assume backed up by specific phrases that were drawn from their materials or their product description that would have given them an advantage. That's the suggestion, I think.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any such. They would have to be pointed out to me both in the source material and where in our RFPQ those would have existed. Many of the strategic directions that we're going in are, I should say, obvious. For example, going mobile with our frontline so that they can do all of their records management through their phones. This is not something which is unique to a particular vendor, but it is important for us to move forward on. So I think the fact that this stems from our strategy, and we are a police service like many others, that vendors who understand those strategies would be marketing to us in a way that would describe those strategies as well.
Okay, one more on this and then just on the review. The final one on this is the deputant said that he had, in his long career, and I'm prepared to accept he seems to have had a long career in this, never seen a procurement document like this. In your view, having worked with the people you did in preparing this document, was there something highly unusual about it, but such that he would have never seen a document like this before in terms of the manner in which it was set out and how they were asked to bid?
The main unorthodoxy in this is to do it in a staged approach, and that is because of my constraints around resources. So putting together a very large RFP is a very labor-intensive effort. Usually it takes 6 to 9 months to build the RFP. And that process is difficult when we have the resourcing that we do at the TPS, and we're trying to move as much as we are. So what we elected to do was create an RFPQ first to see whether we needed to engage in that process. And we did set the bar high because if there is a switching cost of $10 to $20 to $30 million, then there is no sense in making a switch unless that cost is fully justified and more so. And that is yet to be determined, and that's something that we're going to look at through a business case.
Okay. And then finally, if I may, thank you for your patience, Chair and members of the board. The second thing that I sort of asked them about, which they talked about in the letter in particular, more so than in their verbal deputation, was the lack of an objective review process once they did raise concerns with you about this process. Could you just speak to what you did? I mean, the suggestion in the letter was that it had been sort of some of the same people that had sort of answered the questions and that the answers were kind of incomplete or vague or non-existent. There was sort of that suggestion.
Yes.
Maybe you could just address what happened by way of a review in order to satisfy the board that, in fact, when somebody complained like this, that this was taken seriously and that all reasonable steps were taken to make sure that it was an objective review.
Yes, sir. So the review started when the deputation for the June board was submitted with issues. We pulled this motion from the June board and started a process of internal review against those objections. That is conducted by our procurement team, but it was also in consultation with City Legal. That is a consultative process, not a full review, but it is an arm's length body which is charged with protecting the board and the city from liability and from exposure. So that review by our internal team was conducted in cooperation with City Legal. There was also the Fairness Commissioner that was engaged and reviewed the procurement in its entirety, including the materials that were supplied.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Vice Chair Annunziata, you have questions?
Questions that the mayor asked, but just on on the stage 3 outcome on the results of the reference checks, if you can just comment on that. But
sorry.
the other there are other services that are involved in that process.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure of your question.
Page 3, stage 3,
Yep.
where you got required reference checks.
Right.
Yeah.
So we did reference checks with national and international services that have those features in their product to ensure that they actually do, that they're live in production, and that they're valid. So the requirements that we had were the same requirements through each phase of the procurement. In phase 1, it's on the vendors say so that they have that capability. In phase 2, we looked at a demonstration of that capability, and in phase 3, we made sure that that those capabilities were not only available, but they were in production in services of similar size to ourselves. What we're trying to avoid in this situation is what we in the business call vaporware, or a vendor telling us they have a capability which they indeed do not have, and that is how we protect against that, by confirming the capability with other services.
Okay, thank you.
Board members, any further questions? I just have a couple quick ones. Going back to the too many mandatory requirements, and it was mentioned 49, and I also heard maybe 3 or 4 mandatory where pass or fail, you're kind of out. Can you go back? Maybe you don't have the answer to this, but the last time we went through the process to get Versadex, I guess at that point in time, do you have any idea how many mandatory requirements there might have been then? Was it like
actually,
3 or 4? Or?
I did go back and check. There were 19 requirements that were mandatory in what would have been an all-in-one RFP. So there would have been some requirements that would have been scored, which maybe we would have made mandatory in this round, or vice versa. But it's 19. I've had RFPs that have had more. I've definitely had RFPs that have had fewer.
Okay, a substantial number the last time as well. Okay. Another comment that was mentioned was it misses a crucial interface, for example, the MTO. Can you comment on that? The requirement for an interface with MTO is, I believe, what I heard, and it isn't there.
So I think there are most crucial interfaces we included in the mandatories. I'm not sure the MTO would be a tier 1 interface that we require. And maybe that's a characterization, but also what we were asking for was a flexible integration capability. In the digital world, we have to move faster than having sort of block static interfaces built for certain applications. And what we need is more of an integration suite that has flexibility and is using modern methodologies like REST APIs.
Thank you. I think that's it for questions. I don't see any others. Okay. Members, anyone wish to speak to this item? Seeing none, keep calling. Okay, so item 4.1, a motion to approve item 4.1. Board members, Ms. Morgan, second by Vice Chair Nunziata. All in favor? Any opposed? 4-1 carries. Item 4.2, motion to receive. Item 4.2, motion to receive. Ms. Kostakis, second by Councillor Grimes. All in favor? Any opposed? 4-2 carries. Item number 4 is complete. We'll now move forward to item number 7, which is the addition of select Highway Traffic Act authorities for the Toronto Police Service Court officers. And we have one deputant that's virtual, Mr. Langenfeld. Whenever he can be put on, please.
Chris?
Thank you, Doobie. Yes, Board, and it comes as no surprise to those of us in the public that now members of the corporate world are complaining about the processes and the fairness of this board's decisions, but that's a done item now, as we'll see. In terms here of adding Highway Traffic Act authority to special constables, there's a couple of issues. First and foremost is the lack of proper oversight. And of course, we see that's an issue in the last item in questions of Toronto Public Health and a regular item in policing. Here we're looking for the chief to create a separate unit of police officers, granted called special constables, that are going to be out on the road dealing with the public and won't be subject to oversight by the OIPRD, by the SIU. There's no requirements for any reporting when they commit crimes. Presumably, they're not going to be required to wear body-worn cameras. So all of the legal and board policies that have developed over many, many decades in order to protect the public from an out-of-control police force are being circumvented here by the chief's recommendation that we should now create a separate unit of officers or expand the authority of a group of people who aren't officers, who aren't police, but who presumably are going to be looking for more money as their job now becomes expanded to include more of the responsibilities, excuse me, more of the responsibilities of regular frontline police officers as we look to expand that to road safety. We've seen issues over this last winter now with the police chief sending officers out into the streets to close streets down, arguably without authority. We know that there's issues there where there were claims that there was going to be body-worn cameras active, that was certainly reported ahead of time that that would be the case. And yet, as we saw in all the responses when there were issues raised, that apparently that video didn't exist or certainly wasn't reported publicly. And so this seems like simply another effort to circumvent the control processes that were put in place by previous governments and that are frankly quite ubiquitous nationally and internationally, where police aren't responsible for investigating themselves. But as we know with special constables, anytime there's a complaint, all complaints simply go to the Toronto Police Service, and the court services special constables, of course, answer to the chief of police, and the review process for having the Toronto chief of police direct the oversight of that group is a violation of the controls that are there to protect the public and prevent problems. That concludes my deputation in this area.
Thank you, Mr. Langenfeld. Any questions for Mr. Langenfeld? Seeing none, thank you for your deputation. Board members, any questions on the item? Seeing none, motion to approve item number 7. Councillor Grimes, can I have a seconder? Mr. Morgan, all in favor? Any opposed? That carries. We now move forward to item number 9, which are the budget variance reports, and I believe we have one deputant. Derek, whenever you're ready.
So in this report, it says this project has equipped frontline officers with body-worn cameras. This initiative is aligned with and will enable the service's commitment to maintain and enhance public trust and accountability as part of its commitment to the delivery of professional, transparent, unbiased, and accountable policing. Now, you know that I've come here before and just asked about, like, when's this division or when's that division going to get body-worn cameras? And, like, I really could have used at the time, 3 years ago, 53 Division having body-worn, you're already grinning, when I was dragged out of the Northern District Library 3 days in a row because I was being accused of harassing librarians. But as former Councillor Mike Zekas set everyone straight at that board meeting at the library, that wasn't the case. I was just simply for 10 years trying to get them to do something about people like talking way too loud in a library. So I just want to thank 42 Division Superintendent Gregory Watts for putting me in touch with the community engagement officer there, Ryan Ford, because I got to go through this all over again now with the aging court library. It just got so crazy listening to kids being allowed to yell and scream and shriek out loud. And you say something, and I find out from 2 other people that they have been intimidated for complaining about noise levels, like they're the ones doing something bad or wrong, or they're going to get in trouble. I don't want to go through this again, man. If I got to get dragged down and go see Justice of the Peace, Marilyn Shirley, and Kevin Madigan, I will, but I would rather not. So in the future, to enhance trust with this member of the public, I would like 42 Division to make sure that if by chance someone's called, the Toronto Police are called on me, that someone shows up wearing a body camera. And this is a great reason why, because I could have really used an officer at the time at Northern District because I understand that there's a he said, she said, who's really in the wrong here. This is what I got from the library service manager, Ashley Seeley at the Aging Court Library. She emailed me. It is not illegal for people to talk out loud in the library. Oh, yes, you got me there, Ashley. It's only been custom for over a century. Everyone in this room was taught growing up, if you have to talk in the library, you can whisper or you can talk softly. But we were all taught not to talk out loud for respect for others trying to study and concentrate on what they're doing. So now that body cameras are out for all the divisions, now 42 Division gets to show up, unlike 53, and get to listen to one of these librarians utter some of this utter nonsense that you know that Mike Zekas and I asked you when you were on the board. I know Mike said, Jim, when did the board approve of people talking out in the library? And you gave me the same answer as he did, which was, I don't know. I looked into it and they haven't. So in this report, it also says, for both uniform and civilian salaries, there has been reduced spending due to members being placed on unpaid absence for not complying with the vaccination policy. There's a good reason why TPS members did not want to take this shot. I came across this link from a 2016 article for a little-known biotech upstart named Moderna. It said, it's highly risky. Big pharma companies had tried similar work and abandoned it because it's exceedingly hard to get RNA into cells without triggering nasty side effects. Delivery, actually getting RNA into cells, has long bedeviled the whole field. On their own, RNA molecules have a hard time reaching their targets. They work better if they're wrapped up in a delivery mechanism such as nanoparticles made of lipids. But those nanoparticles can lead to dangerous side effects, especially if a patient has to take repeated doses or over months or years. Novartis abandoned the related realm of RNA interference over concerns about toxicity, as did Merck and Roche. And this is from Volpe versus then Councillor Kristen Wong-Tam, 2022. The Ontario Superior Court said just this past June that public officials have a duty to keep each other, the government, and the public informed on matters related to the public interest. They have an obligation to keep each other informed on matters falling within their competence. Because let's face it, this board at no point has talked out loud expressing any concern for these TPS members that have suffered vaccine injuries. So at some point I expect that you're going to do it, right?
Thanks, Derek. Any questions of Derek? Seeing none, thank you for your deputation. Board members, any questions on the reports? Mayor Tory?
On the budget report?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just had a couple, starting with the operating budget. It's noted in the operating budget that the convoy funding, which I think amounted to quite a bit of money, that we've expended in order to help with the war effort, as it were, both, I guess, here and elsewhere, that there was a request into the province, and I just wanted to know, has there been any progress on that? Are we working in concert with other police agencies to try and address what I'm sure is an overall thing they're taking a look at as to sort of what they're going to do or not do for us?
Is that over to you, Chief, or Savina?
I think over to me.
Over to you? Okay.
Yeah, so Mr. Mayor, you noted quite rightly that we put in a formal request to the province seeking cost recovery in relation to the policing requirements for that extraordinary event, as well as requirements associated with the policing and enforcement flowing from the requirements during the pandemic. We've not received a full response yet. The matter is being reviewed, we're told, by the ministry, and we'll be following up.
And that's the Solicitor General, I assume?
That's correct.
Right. A second question on the operating budget, second and only other question. It's noted that in order to take account of the increased separations that have happened, that we would increase the size of the classes later this year. And I know in the past it's been challenging just to sort of, have the requisite qualified people fill those classes. Do we think we're going to be able to do that? Is it something that is, possible? It's not a huge increase, but it's significant enough.
Savina?
Yeah.
Good morning, can you hear me? So the August class has a class already of 110, so we are seeing that many of our proactive efforts that we've made in the first half of the year are starting to pay off in a richer candidate pool, and we are on track for now at least to achieve a class of 120 for December as well.
Good, thank you. And then just on the capital budget, we're dealing with them all at once, I think. I just had two questions. One, a question you're sort of afraid to ask in terms of what the answer might be, but I noted with 41 Division that there was this, problem, it seemed to be a city problem with site approval and some discussion about the green roof and so on. I just wanted to know if there was a sense that the city was being unreasonable or was taking an unduly long period of time, because it hadn't really been brought to my attention, but these are the kinds of things that can happen and do happen, and I just want to see this move along because it's an important project. So I didn't know if somebody could speak to that, and they can be as honest as they want to be about what they're dealing with.
No, it's nothing unreasonable. Discussions are still occurring. Nothing that's been brought to my attention that would merit sort of an update here. The discussions are still progressing and progressing well.
Okay, and then my final question just was about the comm center, where it talks there about the the cost of $100 million to replace the comm center, and then it goes into talking about the fact that it would be advantageous to do this in close consultation with the other emergency services, and then it goes on after that in the report to talk about different amounts that are being spent on design and whatnot. Are we expending those, we meaning the police service, expending those monies kind of on our own with a view to just saying, well, we have to move forward with this, or are we spending that sort of to be shared with the other? I mean, it's all taxpayers' money, but in the end, I'm just concerned that we're not sort of going and spending a lot of money on our own, needs and not doing it in this kind of coordinated way, so you don't end up having to start over again and spend the money a second time to get an installation that is meeting the needs of everybody, which I assume may be the preferred objective.
Yeah, we're still taking a citywide approach, and the funding, right, given that we're still in design and estimates, nothing's been secured yet, but it will be done from a citywide standpoint.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Chair.
Chief, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, not with respect to the budget, but I just wanted to add something in respect to the hiring. We, in fact, had 120 candidates available for this class in August, and HR, as Savina alluded to, has done some incredible work to actually find those candidates. And unfortunately, the Ontario Police College was not able to accommodate our full 120. We could only go with 110, and that's because of the demands for hiring across the province for police officers.
Further questions, board members? Vice Chair Nunziata?
Yes, thank you. I can't find the page, but on one of the pages was mentioned that now that COVID and all the restrictions have been lifted, there's a number of events that are happening and that's happened. So do you know what the increased cost of that was to date?
I don't have that number with me now. I can certainly look into that, Council, unless Savina, do you have any data?
No, well, we can take that away. It's provided as both planned and unplanned events, but we can certainly take it away. We do track all our major events, and we can report that back.
It would have been higher now with the number of events, right? So
yes.
Which was not included in. So also on page 4. There, you mentioned there has been a greater than budgeted number of members on unpaid leaves, maternity, and sick leave, right?
So part of the unpaid leave also had to do with our implementation of our vaccine requirement. In terms of our sick and secondment, we can do a follow-up with specific numbers. If there still remains an increase, or if this primarily is really the implementation of our vaccine requirement, which is now completed. Because this report is for the first half of the year, so that would have been the biggest impact.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Further questions? I just have one quick question. I notice you're projecting an under expenditure at the end of the year. I'm just wondering if you're looking at mandatory 2023 expenses that could possibly be brought forward to 2022 to reduce the 2023 budget pressure. Are you looking at that?
Yes, we've asked all unit commanders and pillars to look at their 2023 needs, look at where they're at this year, and advance purchase what can be. We're also looking at utilizing the surplus also in terms of our reserve strategy to maybe minimize those requirements into next year.
That's great, thank you. Anyone wish to speak to this item? Seeing none, can I have a motion to approve item number 9, which are the budget variance reports, a series of reports. Motion approved, Vice Chair Nunziata, second by Ms. Kostakis. All in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you very much. Now move forward to item number 11, which is a semi-annual report, Toronto Police Service Board Special Fund unaudited statement, January to June 2022. And we have one deputy who I believe is virtual. Doobie, is that right? Debbie? No?
Yep, can you hear me okay? Fantastic. Thank you very much. Good morning, board members and Mr. Chair. I'm Debbie Kumoy, member of the Black Community Consultative Committee, and I'm here to discuss the police reform recommendation number 22. At its meeting on August 18th, 2020, the Toronto Police Services Board approved 81 recommendations for police reform that were contained in a report by Chair Jim Hart entitled Police Reformed in Toronto, Systematic Racism, Alternative Community Safety, Crisis Response Model, and Building New Confidence in the Public Safety. These recommendations establish a roadmap for comprehensive policing reform in Toronto, including building new community-safe response models, various incentives to address systematic racism, and concrete steps to improve trust with our community. The recommendation number 22 reads as follows. Direct the Chief of Police to explore options of the service to pay honorariums and transportation costs to otherwise unpaid community members that contribute their time, skills, and experience to police training, service improvement. Black Community Consultative Committee was formed in 1987 to build relationship with the Black community and TPS. Since 2020, when the recommendation was brought up, the CCC has been in the community on the ground for the last 2 years, talking to the Black community and collecting their information. We have even been contacted by various POCs and communities also. The recommendation states to establish a roadmap for comprehensive policing reform in Toronto, including various incentives to address systematic racism, concrete steps to improve trust with the communities. How is this being built when the board removed BCCC from the number 22 recommendation? Institutional racism is a differential access to the goods, services, and opportunities of society. When differential access becomes integral to the institution, it becomes common practice, making it difficult to rectify. Eventually, the racism demonstrates public bodies and reforms of the actions of communism. When racism is built into the institution, it emerges as a collective action and population. If we do not educate, address institutional racism, we cannot reduce gun violence, nor can we pretend to the public, say Black lives truly matter. Racism has no place in Toronto Police Services. The committee needs sufficient funds, support by TPS boards and facilities to continue its community engagement and training plan for 2022 and 2023 to fulfill its mandate. This community believes in bridging the gap and mending the relationship within the Black community and TPS. To do so, the community needs a full support of TPS board to build a strong, supportive, positive relationship for the future. A Stephen Invite quote says, "In the world we live in, some voices are louder than others. Some were born with megaphones. Some were even connected to the power supply. True diversity is good for the majority, but when the ploy is only to have their millenniums seen through the office windows and their voices never leave the editing room, then the successful becomes for anti-racism." I thank you guys for their time.
Thank you very much for your deputation. Board members, any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today. We appreciate it. Board members, thank you. Board members, any questions on the report itself? Seeing none, could I have a motion to receive item number 11? Motion to receive. Ms. Kostakis, seconded by Councillor Grimes. All in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Final item on this agenda is item number 12, which are two reports on Chief Administrative Investigations. And Mr. Langenfeld. Item number 10 was approved. Item number 12, one deputant, Mr. Langenfeld, who is virtual. If we could put him on, Doobie, thank you.
Thank you, Doobie. Thank you, Board. These two complaints here, or issues from the SIU with the Chief's investigative reports, have one similarity in the sense of body-worn cameras. And of course, Derek raised that in regards to the budget. But in the first of these SIU issues, we have a situation where the police version of the story varies dramatically from the complainant's version of the story, and yet this events that apparently occurred in January 2022, there's no indication that there was any body-worn cameras, and yet we keep hearing that body-worn cameras are out there. In the second complaint here from the SIU, we see that in fact an officer is charged with a criminal offense, and as well as a disciplinary matter of not turning on his camera. And it's only fortunate that another officer did follow protocol and turn on his camera, that we even have the evidence to charge the other officer criminally. And so this goes back to, of course, we've seen this issue going back now more than 6 months at this board, where we had the issue with the Chief's version of what happened in February in Toronto, and then follow up on that. The response was that, well, there's evidence on the internet of what happened. Of course, we know, as I mentioned earlier, that the chief had regularly stated that officers were going to be required to have their body-worn cameras on during those events, and yet we see that apparently there is no video evidence, despite repeated questions to the chief. There is no apparent body-worn video to support his version of the claims. And of course, it's now more than 6 months ago that we dealt with that, so it's too late now to deal with that through this board. However, I look at, there's a July report here in the Toronto Star from Wendy Gillis, referring to a situation where the court recently threw out a large drug bust and weapons bust because the officer apparently lied. And quoting from this article that cites the judge's decision, the judge of the Superior Court of Ontario said, speaking about the officer, "His willful and deliberate failure to obtain clearly relevant video footage leads me to find that those videos, if obtained and presented before this court, would not have supported what he claims he saw." And I'd say that that directly applies as well to the chief's version of events. that don't match up with what actually happened in the city of Toronto. We know that the chief's response was ultimately that, there was radio chatter that supported his version of what he had said the month before. But again, despite the claims that there would be video, and of course, that's the reason we're spending these millions of dollars. That's the reason we know that following the private meeting Mayor Tory had with Axon, we now pay $5 million a year in a subscription fee to Axon to have these video cameras, or at least to use them. And yet apparently we keep seeing situation after situation like this January event with the SIU, where apparently there is no video of the events that happened, despite the fact that that would presumably resolve the issues and resolve whether or not the officer's version or the complainant's version of events was more accurate. I hope that at some point the board will start enforcing and seeing the public protected with the millions of dollars we're spending each year for these body-worn cameras, that in fact we'll actually start seeing some benefit from it, which doesn't seem to be the case despite our hopes that it would be. That concludes my submission.
Thank you, Mr. Langenfeld. Any questions for the deputant? Seeing none. Just a question of you, Chief. Can you comment on Mr. Langenfeld's comment relative to body-worn cameras?
What I will say is that effective June 2nd, 2022, the rollout was completed, and so all frontline uniform officers, other than the ETF, are currently have the body-worn camera. And the ETF we are now in the process of implementing and moving forward and outfitting members of the ETF. Some of that is just based on terms of all their current equipment that they wear, how that will be configured. And so that's something we're working on.
Thanks, Chief. Board members, any further questions on these two reports? Seeing none, can I have a motion to receive item number 12? Motion to receive. Ms. Morgan, second by Councillor Grimes. All in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Motion to adjourn. Ms. Kostakis, Councillor Grimes, all in favor? That carries. We stand adjourned till our next meeting on Tuesday, October the 11th. Thank you.